Our next guest, I am sure, gets called many things. He is a journalist, he is an editor, he is a blogger, but in my mind, what he is, most of all, is a writer, a really, really good writer. David Neiwert is a long-term journalist. He has written 6 books, including In God's Country, Strawberry Days, and The Eliminationists. His new book is called Of Orcas and Men, What Killer Whales Can Teach Us. Dave Neiwert, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Richard.
Yeah, same here. It's been a while, and it's good to hear you again. I have to say, our mutual friend Alex Lawson is of We Act Radio fame is here, and he is extremely impressed that after writing several books about the far right in America, you are now writing about orcas. He finds that pairing fascinating. Any connection there? Any through line there we ought to know about?
Well, there is a story there, I suppose. I was an environmental reporter for a long time, and I had this sort of far-right activity going on in the background of my newspaper work at the places where I worked in the Northwest. And in the 90s, I began covering the militia movement out here as an environmental story because they were organizing as part of an anti-environmental backlash. And it wound up that, after Oklahoma City, I was one of the only guys who had actually talked to them. So I wound up being this kind of militia expert. And over the years, I wound up having a lot more demand for that kind of work since I developed a real expertise in the subject. But at the same time, I had been writing about killer whales since the early 90s out here, and I've always kind of maintained an interest in the subject. Honestly, it's been going out and hanging out with these guys as part of how I sort of spiritually reconnect after dealing with hate groups and the people who populate them. So,
well, and I wondered if that was the case, David Neiwert, because you sort of, when you're covering that kind of extreme hate, you're kind of spelunking in the dark caves of the human spirit, and I imagine you do have to kind of refresh yourself in some way, and your book talks about the fact that although they're called killer whales and so on, they're actually very gentle and highly intelligent creatures, right?
Right. That's pretty much the premise of it. Not only that, I think the underlying premise of the book is that the more we learn about killer whales, the more I think we as human beings have to really kind of reassess a lot of our assumptions about our place in the world and our place in nature. One of those assumptions being that we're the only intelligent species on the planet. I think killer whales could really contest that. They have these immense brains. They have the most glorified brain on the planet, incredible computing power, and they have a genuine sixth sense that we completely lack in the form of their echolocation, which is extraordinarily sophisticated and raises all kinds of implications about their interior lives and the amount of feeling that they have. Their social bonds are extremely powerful, and like I say, the more we learn about them, the more we understand that in some ways they are very much sort of superior beings, partly because they've been here for 6 million years. Humans have only been around for 200,000, and they've been the dominant species in the oceans, and for that matter on the planet. For most of those 6 million years, they've been on top of the food chain. And how did they maintain that? I think it's worth looking at and coming to terms with and understanding.
So that is a very long time for a species to survive. What are the theories? Are there theories that they have a social structure that allows them to survive in that way, or do we not really know? Is this still a subject for study?
I think that's part of it. What we do know is that they do have a powerful sense of empathy, at least for each other and potentially with other species as well. Clearly, they form very empathetic bonds with their trainers when they're in captivity. But they are, it's very clear that for them, empathy is sort of an evolutionary advantage, and I think that's part of one of the important takeaways is that when we look at our own society and where we're failing and where we're falling apart as a species, it's in the failure of empathy, and that really is kind of an important part of the crossover to my work with the far right, because the far right, being in my mind the most dysfunctional part of humanity, is what I think really stands out as its trait is its complete and utter lack of empathy, as evidenced by what we saw last week in Charleston.
Right, and I was going to bring that up. When we talk about empathy, and it's fascinating as a through line between orcas or any other type of life form and human beings. When we talk about complete and utter lack of empathy in a human being, it's considered sociopathic or psychopathic, correct, right? But when we talk about a movement that encourages a lack of empathy, a movement that encourages us to see our fellow human beings as non-human because of skin color or religion or some other characteristic, is it fair to label those groups somehow sociopathic?
Yeah, I would, but I don't know that it's quite fair to apply I'm sure that the people whose psychology would object to applying a psychological term to an entire group, but certainly it's what happens. I mean, in my last book, which dealt with the Minutemen and nativists, the main person in it was clearly a psychopathic person. There's someone, Shauna Ford, who murdered her family down in Arizona, and her. And not only was she utterly devoid of empathy, so were all these people in the Minutemen movement surrounding her. And there's a reason for that. When you look at what the Minutemen stood for, what their agenda was, what their rhetoric was, it was specifically geared to attract psychopaths simply because it was so lacking in any form of real human empathy at all.
Now, I want to get back at some point, David Neiwert, to your new book, Of Orcas and Men, What Killer Whales Can Teach Us. But before we do, as we talk about the far right and the lack of empathy, we had Dylan Roof commit these horrible murders in Charleston. Is there any way, and you read his manifesto and so on, you see a lot of recycling of ideas, and I don't hesitate to call them ideas, but impulses and language and formulations that we've heard before. Do you think something like an extreme lack of empathy can actually be taught or conveyed? I mean, you've studied the right for so long. Is it in some way, for lack of a better word, infectious, this kind of hostile, I would still call it sociopathic disregard for others?
Sure. I think it can be programmed through systematic propagandization in the form that we see, for example, on Fox News. Fox News consistently and daily and hourly reinforces people's prejudices by, for one thing, they frequently emphasize stories featuring black on white crime, or stories that make black people look like criminals, and when you read Dylan Roof's manifesto, I mean, half of it is stuff that you could have heard on Hannity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure, of course.
And so I think that a lot of the hatred that we see, and I do work for the Southern Poverty Law Center in my day job, and monitor these far-right groups. And these folks are, it's constantly like this, that they are, stripping themselves of their own humanity by denying the humanity of other people. And it's a very interesting syndrome. It is one. It's kind of a two-way process in which these people dehumanize themselves along with whoever it is that they're hating.
Now, one of the things I found, and I'm sort of talking to you as one writer to another now, David Neiwert, is that a few years back I did several pieces on not the way you do them, but some pieces on hate crimes as well. And I did one on the murder of a house cat in the South, where a liberal politician's family pet was murdered, and the word liberal was carved on the body, and the children found it a horrible crime. I mean, obviously not as consequential as a human murder, but I pointed out in that there had been a media dehumanization of liberals as a group for a long time. You know, Dick Morris's book, and cut off their heads, and Ann Coulter, How to Talk to a Liberal with a Baseball Bat, and all that, and just sort of mused out loud whether there was a connection. And a couple major publications that we all know well, who carry me all the time, refused to carry it because they said that I was somehow blaming Sean Hannity or whomever for the crime, which I pretty explicitly did not do. Do you ever run into problems in writing on these subjects where you find that people are uncomfortable allowing us to explore these connections between the way the ideas get communicated on something like Fox News and something like the horror of Charleston?
Well, sure, yeah. It's pretty much been my career since I left MSNBC, and have been dealing, with freelance career. Editors are constantly refusing that kind of stuff. It's why I took to blogging, because it was about the only place I could actually express these points of view and have it be published. And yeah, I think that these are important questions. Not only that, I wound up writing a book about the subject titled The Eliminationists, that really kind of explored the way that hateful rhetoric not only pervades mainstream conservatism, but really twists the shape and nature of that conservatism in an ugly way, and very unfortunate way, because I grew up in southern Idaho. I understand what conservatism kind of should be playing an important role in our body politic, and instead it's becoming this malignant entity that is actually causing us severe harm.
Well, let's talk about a less malignant entity for a moment. Let's talk about your book of Orcas and Men, what the killer whales can teach us. What killer whales can teach us. I guess, first of all, everybody's going to wonder, so I'll ask you, how did they come to be known as killer whales?
Well, it actually just started with the Basque whalers, who were the very first whalers from Europe in the 16th century, roughly. Named them in Spanish. The words were whale killers, but because of Spanish syntax, it got misinterpreted in English as killer whales. They were seen as seen by these whalers killing other whales, hunting and chasing them down. And some of the whales that they were trying to catch, particularly baleen whales, which were indeed often the prey of certain kinds of mammal-eating killer whales. And so, when the name came around in English, they were just known as killer whales. And it actually fit in with, the species name, which is Orcinus orca, which just basically means, a demon from hell. And that was because they were very feared. There's a whole European mythology of fear built around these strange sea creatures, and of course it turns out later that these fears were completely unfounded. But nonetheless, that's kind of the European history of it. Now, the Native Americans who lived around them here in the Northwest had very much the opposite sort of relationship with them. In fact, had a sort of symbiotic relationship with the killer whales, where they were seen as spiritual ancestors and relatives, actually. In some cases, so.
And some of the Native Americans did consider all animals relatives, which is not a bad viewpoint. But I guess then, so what do they have to teach us? Your subtitle of Orcas and Men is what they have to teach us. What do we need to be learning from the killer whales?
Well, for one thing, that empathy isn't necessarily a disadvantage. We frequently treat it as a disadvantage, because it does make us vulnerable to the predations of psychopaths. But nonetheless, I think it's an essential ingredient, and one that it's a value that I don't think we emphasize nearly enough in our society, and is something we need to be talking about more. Secondly, I think they, as I said, they challenge our view of ourselves as the most intelligent animal on the planet, and that has all kinds of ethical consequences for us, particularly with how we treat the killer whales we have captive. And this gets into the whole blackfish issue.
Right.
Of, well, what about places like SeaWorld and Miami Seaquarium, where you have these animals kept up in these tiny little pools, plain white concrete pools that are, spectacularly dull, especially for an animal that whose primary sense is this exquisitely subtle echolocation sense.
So it's like being kept in a
similar to putting
room.
a human being in a plain white room and just locking them on.
Yeah. Well,
and so of course they develop all kinds of mental issues as a result, and it's actually to their credit that they don't develop it more, because they are very mentally strong animals. But inevitably, some of them crack, as did Tillicum, the main person in blackfish.
So the other quality they can teach us is empathy for other living things that don't happen to be human, I guess.
Right. Well, it certainly. I think what they really can teach us is that animals are not just animals, just objects to be thrown into a pool. That we need to start considering the interior lives of the animals that are in our care. And killer whales are a good place to start, but that's just a start.
Absolutely, and your book gives us a beautiful glimpse into that, and a beautiful perspective on that. So I recommend it to everyone who's listening. Our guest has been David Neiwert. That's spelled Neiwert. I think I got that right. The book is Of Orcas and Men: What Killer Whales Can Teach Us. Dave, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, RJ.
You bet.
Bye.
We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.